Hi, this is Son of the Hunter Machina, bringing you another Bottom 10 this time. Now, in case you didn't know, mythologies and folktales are something of a special area of interest for me. I'm really interested in the various pantheons of different cultures. And if you have this similar kind of interest, you're aware that every mythology, pantheon, or whatever, a story cycle, has its fair share of dumb and lame stories. And that's exactly what this Bottom 10 is all about. This is my Bottom 10 worst and lamest folktales and myths. Now, these stories are not in any particular order, and just to show you that I don't have a bias towards other mythologies in particular, I'm going to start off with a story from Finnish folk tradition. And just like any good lame story, this one involves a real-life person, Bishop Henry, who, by the way, is the patron saint of Finland, so thanks for that, Catholics, even though we're mostly Lutheran over here. So one stormy winter night, Bishop Henry is making his way through Finland. He happens by this house and asks the lady of the house to let him in and rest there while the worst of the storm blows off. Now, Bishop Henry is so grateful that he was given shelter from the storm that he actually pays this woman with gold. And after being well rested, he naturally goes off, and the husband of this woman comes back home. His name is Lolly, by the way. And what does his wife tell him the minute he walks in? "Oh, it was terrible. The bishop forced his way in here, and he slept in our bed, and he ate our food, and he didn't even pay us." This naturally pisses Lolly off. So he grabs his axe and runs into the night after Bishop Henry. He catches up with Bishop Henry on an icy lake and murders him with his axe. Now, at this point, it's appropriate for me to remind everyone that in order to become a saint, you have to do 2 miracles, and here come the miracles. So Lolly is, of course, feeling very victorious after murdering a helpless bishop. So he takes the bishop's ring and puts it on his finger, and he takes his funny hat and puts it on. Now that Lolly has gloated enough, he decides to take the ring off. But as he does, the ring removes the skin and flesh of his finger. His natural reaction, of course, is to panic and throw the bishop's hat off, not realizing that the same divine punishment is about to befall on his scalp. So Bishop Henry and his murderer die side by side on a frozen lake. Now, what makes this story so lame is it's so depressing and unfair, really. I mean, okay, so Lolly did kill a bishop, which in a religious folktale is usually a bad thing. But his wife, who's really the real villain of the story, gets off scot-free with the bishop's gold. I mean, this story is very popular in Finland, not only because it depicts the relationship of the organized, regal, religious Swedes and the tribal pagan Finns. It's also very popular because the murderer in the story is a victim himself. But I just have to say that this is one of the most ridiculous and terrible folk stories I've ever heard. Next up, of course, I have a little creation myth for you. And creation myths are always good for laughs. But this one in particular is very interesting because it actually involves the concept of mass extinction, which, as we all know, is a real event. So this is the Aztec creation story. Now, I'm a little fuzzy on the details, but one god, whose name I can't remember, created from the void the first sun. And a natural disaster befell that sun, and it was destroyed. In comes Tezcatlipoca, the lord of the smoking mirror, and he decides that it's up to him to repopulate the universe, and so he creates the second sun. Now, in comes Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, and being the asshole that he is, decides to destroy Tezcatlipoca's sun and create his own. Tezcatlipoca is very pissed by this, and so he goes and destroys the third sun. And every single time the sun is destroyed, by the way, all life on Earth dies. So once again, Tezcatlipoca builds himself a new sun, and Quetzalcoatl at this point has the bright idea. You know what? If I destroy his sun and create a new one, he's just going to destroy mine. So I don't know what he does, but apparently an earth monster attacks Tezcatlipoca. The fourth sun is destroyed, and Quetzalcoatl creates the fifth sun and so starts the Age of Man. Quetzalcoatl, however, has to fight the Earth Monster, and as an added insult to injury, he gets his leg gnawned off by the Earth Monster. But this is why Tezcatlipoca is depicted with a bone for a leg. Now, this story just shows what assholes gods are. That Quetzalcoatl takes all the glory for creating life, and Tezcatlipoca is left without a foot. And another story about monsters gnawing limbs off, this one comes from Norse mythology. Well, in case you know your Norse mythology, you probably know the classic monsters. One of them was Fenrir, the monster wolf. And as is typical of all cultures, whenever there is a giant animal on the loose, it needs to be killed, or at least trapped in some manner. So the gods have to band together to stop Fenrir, because apparently no chains can hold him. So they create this magical rope, they gang up on the Fenrir, they tie him down, everybody's happy, the wolf is caught, except for Tyr, who got his arm gnawned off by the wolf. Now I just have to ask, what kind of a moron goes straight for the head of a wolf? Tyr only has himself to blame for this, and even though it's considered such a noble sacrifice that he gave his arm for a greater cause, I think it's just plain stupid. Even He-Man could have figured out that you put a fucking log in a monster's mouth. You let him numb on that, not your fucking hand. Our next story comes from the only religion that I know that is both monotheistic, polytheistic, and atheistic all at the same time. So, it's Hinduism and the story of Ganesha's elephant head. Now, Ganesha was born when Parvati, one of Shiva's consorts, was taking a bath, and she wanted someone to make sure nobody snuck into the house while she was taking a bath, so she created for him a son. Just like that. Shiva comes home, and there's this little kid standing in his way, and Ganesha will not let anybody else through, because he will not listen to anybody except the voice of her mother. Shiva becomes very annoyed, pulls out his sword, and beheads the poor boy. This, of course, makes Parvati very upset. And unfortunately, Shiva apparently struck his head so hard it flew off and could never be found again. Yeah! So Shiva naturally asked the almighty force of the universe, Brahma, for advice, and this is what Brahma says. Brahma says to take the first head of a living creature that he runs into while heading north. So Shiva sends his spirits to find what the first thing that north, and what they find is a dying elephant. So honestly, I don't know what the logic of this story is, but Shiva takes the head of the elephant and puts it on Ganesha's body. Sometimes the powers that be are just really full of it. Finally, to wrap this first half of the list up, here's a legend from Greek mythology. Now this is the story of Theseus, who, in case you didn't know, had a bad habit of stealing women. Mainly other people's women. And one of the women he stole was Hades' wife. Well, Hades' wife eventually makes it back to the underworld, and Hades decides to show what a good sport he is by inviting Theseus over for dinner. By the way, if this story has a morale, it's never accept dinner from Hades. Because the minute Hades' wife and Theseus sit down, they get stuck in their chairs. So it's the old super glue trick, is it? Well, anyway, Hercules, or Heracles as it's properly pronounced, is in the underworld performing one of his 12 tasks, getting Hades' badass dog, and he happens by Theseus and decides to free him, and like the dumb shit he is, tries to tear him forcibly from the chair, thus leaving his thigh muscles there. And that's why the Athenians have such lean thighs. Yes, it's the old what I like to call why does the bear have a short tail story, answering questions that nobody ever asks. We'll continue this tomorrow, I hope, and I'll promise that this list will pick up a little bit on the latter half.